I personally believe that at this point it is impossible to know who committed the 5 grisly murders that we know as Jack the Ripper's work. The murders occurred in London in 1888, long before police forensics were anywhere near what they are today. Further, because of the fame and notoriety, a lot of the physical evidence has since disappeared from police files. So since it's impossible to prove without the shadow of a doubt the identity of Jack the Ripper, if there really was one murderer for all 5 victims, instead let's talk about Edgar Degas, the famous artist of pastels and ballerinas. Edgar was born in 1834 and died in 1917. He was a contemporary of the murders. In fact, he was just over 50 when they occurred. If you are a student of art history, you probably know that Degas started to lose his vision as he grew older. And if you're a fan of true crime and serial killers, you'll probably know that there's a portion of the brain that is a dead zone in people who are serial killers. Professor Fallon of UC Irvine has scanned many brains of psychopaths and murderers and has concluded that the area of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, specifically the portion of your brain right behind your eyes, the orbitofrontal cortex, is a dead zone in those who have planned and carried out multiple murders. Edgar Degas recognized the disease he was getting and the blindness that he suffered from because it was a hereditary disease other members of his family also suffered. As a result of the age of onset and several other characteristics of the disease he described, and the fact that it was hereditary, many people believe this disease to be Stargardt's disease, although it is impossible to know for sure. In a completely unrelated note, the orbitofrontal cortex is stimulated by visual input, and as someone goes blind, that region of the brain can go quiet. Activity in that brain would go as dark as if you were a psychopath. Edgar Degas was always famous for his misogyny, but it worsened as he aged. Vincent van Gogh and his brother Theo would write letters to each other and comment about his hatred of women. He was also publicly anti-Semitic, which came up during the Dreyfus affair. All 5 canonical victims of Jack the Ripper were women, and they were also spicy workers, if you know what I mean. Edgar Degas is most famous for his paintings of ballerinas. Most of them are actually pastels. Something that you might not be aware of is that at that time, many ballerinas funded their art through spicy work on the side. The youngest ballerinas at the time were known as the Little Rats in Paris. And the only statue that Degas ever completed and displayed was called Little Dancer, age 14. Camille Laurens wrote an excellent book with that title, Little Dancer, age 14, and I would recommend you read it. It is a study of the girl who posed for Degas. It is also the story of the author trying to find information about a girl who disappeared off the face of the planet. Just a few short years after posing for Degas, she disappeared entirely. There's no record of her after that time. Miss Laurent says that she was caught trying to flee the country with her older sister, and that's the last record of her in history. When Degas released this statue, most of society hated it. They were shocked and offended by it, in part because he dressed it in a costume. By dressing the statue in a costume, it was very clear that the statue had no costume on, and neither had the little girl posing for it. Even in 1888, Degas faced a lot of criticism for that, and he never again showed any of his works in public. Another reason it was criticized was that he made these statues of wax, which was not a material used at the time. However, it was a material used to preserve organs. Degas continued to create statues throughout his life, and he never publicly displayed them. He had them in his studio, and he would often remold and remake them throughout his lifetime. The wax original of the Little Dancer, age 14, is available, and it has been run through x-rays. You can find those online and the comments about them. The statue is said to be full of organic material. There is no further commentary on that. Some of it is paintbrush handles and wood, but other than that, it's just listed as organic material. Degas kept very detailed diaries. However, his diaries end before 1888, despite the fact that he lived till 1917. Degas' family came into possession of his studio. He had no children. It was his cousins and his aunts and uncles and nephews who took apart his estate and sold off everything they could. They also recast the Little Dancer in bronze as many times as they could without damaging the original, and sold that for a huge profit. And they were eager to capitalize on his good name, whatever good name was left at that point. On a completely unrelated note, of the canonical five, most of the victims had at least part of an organ missing after investigation was done. For the most part, these organs were not found. One portion of one organ was thought to perhaps have been mailed to Scotland Yard, although the veracity of that is unknown. There was no DNA testing at the time. So where was Degas during these murders? So was Degas in Paris during the murders? Well, actually, it's pretty clear that he wasn't for at least a few of them. Many letters were mailed from a respite, a retreat up in the mountains, a very remote town in the Alps in the southern region of France. And Degas wrote to all of his most famous friends long and poetic letters about activities that were going on at the time. I've read translations of these letters. Thank you to Neff for those. He's an amazing scholar. And although they mention things like weather and plays that would have been scheduled in advance, there's not much to actually prove his presence there if you were a very suspicious person. However, unfortunately, I don't speak French, so tracking down his exact whereabouts on all of the days of the murders, I'm unable to do. If you speak French or you know of a good art historian who would like to look this up, that's cool. Anyway, this video is getting really long and it's getting really late, and I'd love to go into the Gall Street Manifesto and all of and how this ties into his anti-Jewish sentiments, and how that ties back also to the fact that Jack the Ripper might have been anti-Semitic. And but I just am exhausted, so I'm gonna have to save that for another video if you want it.